I have finally gotten to engage in proper PvP combat in Epic Age, and I wanted to share 5 tips and tricks that you guys probably want to know and should know before doing PvP in this game. I'm currently sitting at rank 19 overall on the server in terms of battle merit, which is what you get from PvP fights, as well as 10th overall on the server in the arena. Let's dive into it. All right, tip number 1 is quite basic, but it is very important, and that is you want to use troop counters to your advantage. What I mean by that is cavalry beats infantry, infantry beats archers, archers beat spearmen, spearmen beat cavalry. Everything beats artillery. Artillery is not for direct combat, it is for dealing siege damage. So just make sure that when possible, you are targeting enemy marches that you have an advantage in. Tip number 2 is you want to watch your morale and take advantage of low enemy morale. So this little yellow bar that is underneath the names of these squads is their morale indicator. A full bar means full morale, an empty bar means no morale. And I say that this is very important because it has a massive impact on how much army your damage deals. It's the wrong report. This is kind of a throwaway report anyway, as I was fighting into siege and low-level commanders, but I wanted to just show the effect that morale can have. The troop morale of this team is 64. That means attack is reduced by 69.5%. If they were at absolutely 0 morale, they would be dealing 70% less damage, whereas in my case, my troop morale was over 100. That does not give a damage boost, it just lets you move extra tiles before taking a damage loss. So at a 100 plus morale, you're dealing 100% of normal damage. At 0 morale, you're dealing 70% less damage. That is absolutely absurd amount of damage reduction. I've seen people that are marching super far, and then their army has no morale, and it's super easy to pick them off with basically 0 losses. If you need to travel a long distance, make sure that you are transferring to a tent or a city near where you need to go, as while your army is transferring, they do not lose any morale regardless of how far they travel. So make sure you get tents up on the front lines unless a city is close by, transfer, and then move your army up. All right, for tip number 3, it's use these overworld map buildings, on map buildings, whatever you want to call them. Use them to your advantage. And what I mean by this is in this game, you do not have to have an adjacent tile in order to engage in combat with an enemy army. We'll see it happen here in just a second. Even though the enemy team has no tile adjacent to Falchion's army, they're still going to be able to fight. Spike traps, I don't know how to say the actual name, Cheval de Frise, I guess. Spike traps, they will stop enemy armies, and actually I didn't know that there were spike traps there. A good example of that. These will stop enemy army movement. This is good for 2 reasons. Number 1, it means they can't just run at your army if there's a full wall of spike traps. Number 2, it means they have to take time burning things down, take stamina burning these down. The time that they have to sit here means that somebody with a cavalry army, since this is an infantry army, somebody could come in and take an advantageous fight. Additionally, stamina is a very precious resource in this game, so making sure that you're burning as much of the enemy's stamina as possible is important. Another thing to know is, this is a perfect example of this with the arrow tower. Arrow towers protect adjacent tiles. They're not going to win fights for you, but they can help ensure that the enemy can't just send 100 siege units up to these chevals, these spike traps, to burn them down. In this game, the calculation for siege damage doesn't care how many actual siege troops are in your army. Your army will do the same amount of siege damage if it has 30,000 siege units or if it has just 100 siege units. If your spike traps are not protected by arrow towers, the enemy can just send 100 siege units in, very low risk, very high reward for them, and burn your spike traps up. What the arrow towers do is they make sure that the enemy has to actually commit to burning down your spike traps, which, like I said, gives you time to hit their armies with advantageous counters and burns their stamina. Nobody really cares if their 100 troop siege army has to burn stamina. They do care, however, if their main marches have to burn stamina. Finally, on this point, enemy armies cannot march onto completed tents. So if you have a finished tent, your army is somewhat safe unless they get an adjacent tile to it, in which case then they can start sieging down your tent. But they can't do like what happened a second ago here, where the army just straight up marches onto that tile. Number 4 is keep track of the paths that your armies are traveling, and also keep track of the enemy army paths and take advantage of that. If you see an army that's marching from a super far distance, which in this case they're not, but if you click on them, you can see the path. If you see an enemy army that's marching a really far distance, that means you can probably intercept them at some point in their path and potentially fight them when they're low morale. This is also very useful when you're sniping enemy siege armies because they move quite slowly. People will often send them on like an hour-long march, close the game, not come back, then their siege gets sniped. Picking off siege is very, very easy in this game because it is so weak in actual combat. And on the flip side, make sure you're not sending super long marches where enemies could just move into your path and intercept those armies that are at low morale, as the penalty for being low morale is super brutal. And finally, tip number 5 is just focus on one squad, at least in the early stages of the season. You're going to get more mileage out of having one really powerful squad than having 3, 4, or 5 squads. Now, if you're a really big spender and you can afford to do that, by all means, go for it. However, it takes quite a lot of investment in order to have a full legendary team that is fully awakened and has good skills and has those skills leveled up. As I've talked about in one of my other videos, level 10 skills are at least twice as good as level 1 skills. Very important to level them up. But if we just take my Philip II, for example, in order to get him to this point, I had to awaken him, which means sacrificing 2 legendary heroes. Then I had to spend a whole bunch of skill points on upgrading the first skill. I had to spend 15 epic commanders to level this up to tier 3. To the point where I can take it to level 10. Additionally, I had to sacrifice a legendary commander in order to even give this skill to Philip in the first place, and same thing with exploit over indulgence. So all said and done, Philip is 1 legendary, awakening is 2 more, that's 3, 2 more S tier skills, that's 5 legendary commanders effectively going into this 1, and 30 epic commanders. Same thing with Richard, same thing with Mark Antony. However, this army is extremely powerful, and I've had great success with it overall. I've won almost all of my fights, not all of them, but almost all of them. But when it's all said and done, even if I wanted to level up and use, let's say, this Subutai squad, which is kind of what I just used for leveling other commanders that I want to try, I would need 6 more legendary commanders just to awaken these guys. Then I would probably need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I don't know why I counted it out. I would probably need somewhere between 4 and 6 more legendary commanders that I could inherit to give these guys the best skills that they could have. And then I would need a total of 90 epic commanders to advance all of those legendary skills. So it is a huge level of investment to have extra squads in this game. Use your extra squads for flipping tiles, use them for sniping siege stacks, as siege stacks tend to be quite weak. A lot of times people will siege with just like a couple hundred units anyway, and use them to level other commanders that you want to try. Like I said, you're going to get way more mileage out of a fully leveled, fully awakened, fully skilled up team with the best possible skills that you can have, rather than having just 3 or 4 marches that get completely decimated. Another thing along that vein is in this game, the number of reserves that you can have in your base at any one time is actually quite low, at least compared to other games like this that I have played. So reinforcing multiple armies after losing battles is going to take you a very long time and a lot of resources. It's going to be way more resource and troop efficient to have a very strong army that can take multiple fights, then come home and get reinforcements, and then you can train up while they're out fighting again. Basically, long story short, is if you're trying to keep 4 and 5 armies fully stocked on troops, it's just not going to be possible because you're never going to have enough reserves to reinforce more than 1 or 2 marches at a time. All right, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.